Chapter 2 of Zhang Henshui's Golden Fen family. Visiting a lover on a moonlit night returns to Yongxiang. A fancy banquet invites tired friends to a double secluded apartment. Yanxi laughed for a while, walked back to the study, found a hat, put it on, and walked out of the door. His place is called Lake Lane, and it's not too far from Luohuahutong. He didn't take any kind of car. He just took the tour guide and walked there by himself. Jin Rong had already told him that the Leng family lived in the West End, but he took a big detour and entered from the East End. He walked slowly next to other people's houses, counting their steps, and became more attentive as he got to the west. An alley is almost finished. To the south of that alley, isn't there a small black house with the house number of a cold house nailed on the door? Yanxi thought, it must be here. But the doors were closed tightly, and there was nothing else except the Leng Jai Jai nameplate on the door. After hesitating for a while, he had no choice but to walk over. Walking through Luohuahutong, you will find a small street. He saw a small cigarette shop at the corner, so he bought a pack of cigarettes in the shop. After buying cigarettes, I walked over from the West End again, but looking at the small black door, it was still closed. I thought to myself, coming and going, I keep looking at these two black doors. What's the point of this? At this time, there were 4 or 5 teenage children on the open ground outside the black door, playing money there, noisily and clenched together. Seeing the opportunity, Jin Yanxi put her hands behind her back, took the cane, and stood aside to watch their fuss. But from time to time he turned around and peeked at the door. After standing there for about an hour, I suddenly heard a bell ringing at the door, already opened. At this time, there was a flower seller with a very sharp Beijing accent. Jin Yanxi couldn't help but think, isn't this that person? He was afraid that turning his head suddenly would be a bit abrupt. But as if he was deliberately planning to leave, he turned around and slowly and furtively glanced sideways. Looking at it, I couldn't help but laugh. It turned out to be an old woman with combed hair, about 40 years old. But since he turned around to leave, if he stopped suddenly, he was afraid that others would be suspicious, so he let go and walked towards the east end of the alley. As soon as I walked out of San Wujia's house, I saw a female student in blue clothes and black skirt coming across from me. She smiled at me. This person was exactly the one I met in Hadian. When Yanxi saw her smile, her heart skipped a beat. I thought, does she recognize me? He raised his hand, holding the brim of his hat, and was about to give her a brief greeting and smile back. But she slowly came closer and looked at her eyes. It was clear that she was not smiling at her. Then I heard someone shouting from behind, "Girl, it's too late to come back today." The female student nodded again and smiled slightly. 8/10 of Yanxi's smile appeared on his face. At this time, his face became hot, and he immediately put away his smile. As the people came closer, he felt a little embarrassed to look at them face to face, so he lowered his head slightly and walked a few steps. When he raised his head, he saw a figure in blue clothes flashing to his right, followed by a faint scent of makeup. It turned out that he had already passed by. When I was about to look back, I felt a little embarrassed. During this period of hesitation, I passed 2 more houses. Just for a moment, he suddenly stopped, holding his hand on his collar, as if he thought of a problem, and immediately turned around, pretending to be in a hurry to turn back. When I walked to the door, I saw the man walking in, his silhouette fleeting. Yanxi walked slowly for a few steps, feeling nostalgic. But just then the children who were paying money started laughing, and Yanxi thought, are they laughing at me? He immediately puffed out his chest and walked over. Walking out of the Luohuahutong, Jin Yanxi paused and thought, I saw this with my own eyes. It is completely confirmed that she lives here. But if it's confirmed, it's confirmed. So what can I do? Aren't I a little dazed watching people? I went back home and sat alone in my study, thinking about that smile from that person at the entrance of the alley. How could I know it was not directed at me? It was a pity that I was too honest at that time, so I just smiled back at her. So what does it matter? I have such a serious face. Shouldn't she say that I am too ignorant? If you say I don't know what's interesting, that's fine. If you say I'm pretending to be serious, then I'll be living up to what others mean. As he thought like this, he seemed to have a round face, a pair of bright eyes, and a light blush on his cheeks. From the blush, 2 faint smiles appeared slightly. Yanxi thought of this, her eyes drooped slightly, and she couldn't help but smile. At this moment, someone suddenly said, Master Qi, did you believe what I said? Didn't I wrong you? Yanxi looked up and saw Jin Rong standing beside him, also smiling. Yanxi said, "What do you believe?" Jin Rong said, "You're still hiding it from me, otherwise, wouldn't you have gone out today? This time, no one followed you. They must have gone to Luohuahudong. I guess you must have seen that lady. Otherwise, why were you thinking about laughing just now?" Jin Yanxi said, "Nonsense. Why can't I smile?" Jin Rong said, "When I came back, I seemed to be worried about something, and now I smiled again. I think it has something to do with it." Yanxi said, "It's good that you can guess what's on my mind." Jin Rong said with a smile, "Can't you guess? Come on. Don't mention this anymore." Yanxi smiled and said, "What you said is right. We don't know her, so what's the use of knowing her name and address?" He smiled and said, "I'm not busy anyway. If you go there once a day, maybe you'll get to know each other slowly. You mentioned a story 2 days ago. It's not that a male student met a female student on the road every day. Later, have we become friends?" Yanxi said, "That's just a lie. How can it be true? Besides, if they meet each other every day, it's because of this that I go out every day. What's the point of taking a walk?" Jin Rong said with a smile, "It's a pity that there are no acquaintances in front of or behind the house. If there are any acquaintances, maybe we can get to know her through the introduction of her neighbors." Jin Rong said with a smile. This was an unintentional remark, but it reminded him out of thin air. He slapped the table with his hand and said, "I have an idea." Jin Rong stood aside and was startled when he heard a sudden slap on the table. Said, "Although we can do it that way, there are no acquaintances in that alley." Jin Yanxi ignored him, took out a box of cigars from the drawer, took one, struck a match, and lit a fire. Stand up. He lay crookedly on a large velvet sofa, with his right leg resting on his left leg, and kept laughing. Jin Rong didn't know what medicine he was selling in his gourd, and he didn't dare to ask him, so he left quietly. He lay on the chair, thought for a while, and felt that the plan was very good. However, this amount of money needs to be planned in advance. This Sunday, their carnival will definitely involve gambling. Why don't I get involved, and if I win, I can spend it? Thinking about it this way, I think the method is right. At that time, I rested for a while in the study room, but couldn't hold myself any longer and wanted to walk out again. So I put on my hat and came out again. When I walked to the gate, I saw more than a dozen cars parked on both sides of the white wall. I asked the concierge, "Who is here again? Are they having a meeting here?" The concierge said, "No, today is my wife's treat. Don't Master Qi know?" Yanxi asked, "Is Grandma Lucy here?" The concierge said, "Yes, the 2 foreign ladies from the Wu family are here too." Yanxi heard that she wanted to go with Grandma Lucy. Talk. Immediately turned around and walked inside. When I walked to the heavy door, I thought again, she might not be able to get away at this time, so I'd better go and do mine. Thinking like this, I ran out again. By this time, it was already getting late, and the electric lights on the street were already bright. Because I was walking on the road, not riding a car or riding a horse, I was very embarrassed when I met acquaintances, so I just walked around in the alleys. After wandering around, we entered a small alley. The alley was less than a foot wide, with no sky above and no roads at either end. Moreover, in a secluded place, there were no electric lights. There was just an iron wire stretched across the wall of the house, and some glass lampshades hung on the iron wire. Inside the lampshade, a small kerosene lamp was placed in the glass shade, emitting a light yellow light, and the shadows of some people were dimly visible. The houses on both sides of the alley are so short that you can reach out and touch the eaves of other people's houses. When I saw the dark roof of someone else's house, I was already a little scared. I was panicking. I didn't dare to raise my head. I kicked 1 foot higher, 1 foot lower, and bumped forward. I was feeling flustered, but I couldn't get out of the alley. I felt a big black thing squatting in front of me. When I looked up, it turned out to be a blocked earth wall. After seeing it clearly, I felt more relieved. However, another fluffy black shadow appeared on the wall, with 2 black lights shooting out from it. I couldn't help but feel creepy all over. A burst of hot sweat burst out, and my heart wanted to jump into my mouth. At this time, it was neither possible to move forward nor to stop. I didn't know what to do. At this moment, the fluffy shadow suddenly stood up and let out a meowing sound. Only then did Jin Yanxi realize that it was a cat. He patted his chest, took out a handkerchief from his pants pocket, and wiped the sweat from his head. I walked forward quickly, and finally walked out of the alley, and met the door of someone's house. Another big lion and wild dog emerged from the downstairs. He stretched his head upward, and rushed over, startling him again. At this time, I looked up and saw an open space in front of me. Because the alley just now was small, it was like sitting in a well and looking at the sky. When I walked out, the ground was covered with white snow and moonlight. Looking up, I saw a round moon in front of me. The surrounding houses were quiet in the moonlight. Only the vendors selling goods could still hear their shouts from a distance. Yanxi has never seen this kind of situation before. I thought to myself, there is such a calm place in this city. Walking under the watery moonlight, I walked around this open space and found a policeman, only to realize that I was at the west end of Luohuahutong. Remembering the house number, I only passed a few houses and it was the Leng family. Yanxi stood at the door of the house for a while, looking at the shadow of the tree behind the house. In the hazy moonlight, it was exactly as he expected. He smiled to himself and thought, my plan must have been half successful. When he walked to the gatehouse, he was tripped by a stone and almost fell. When he looked down, he found that it was a boundary stone. There were words written on it, but he didn't pay attention to it. But he thought, when that person stood here in the daytime and talked to the old woman, it seemed that he was holding something in his hand. Wasn't it a boundary stone? From this, he thought, her plain clothes and cloth skirt, elegant and pleasant appearance, are definitely not comparable to the group of people in the makeup team that he has seen before. The place where he is standing now is exactly where she stood during the day. If I could stand side by side with her under the moon and whisper sweet words, how fun it would be. Thinking of this, he didn't know where he was. He stayed there for a long time, until a rickshaw came by, jingling and ringing its bells, which woke him up. After the rickshaw passed by, he took advantage of the fact that there was no one in the alley and carefully looked at the trees next to the house. He saw that the branches of the trees stretched straight past the east side of the house. There seemed to be a courtyard to the east, and the earthen wall next to the gate was probably behind the courtyard. This investigation made him feel that his plan was in line with his plan. He was very happy and hired a rickshaw and drove straight back. When he arrived at home, he saw that the lights were on from the gate to the inner room, down the corridor, and under the hall. He knew that the female guests had not left. He walked slowly inside and looked inside through a marble screen. When he looked inside, he saw his mother and sister-in-law Paifeng entertaining guests. There was a large dining table in the middle, with new red and light green dishes in the vase on it, and the flowers were arranged in clusters. All the people sitting at the tables were familiar people, especially the two women in suits. Their 4 snow-white arms were exposed from their ribs, which were very voluptuous. Yanxi thought, the concierge said they were foreign ladies, and I thought they were Miss Luce and Miss Mary, but they turned out to be the 2 sisters of the Wu family. Just as he was watching with interest, he heard footsteps behind him. When he turned around, it was the kitchen assistant of the Western restaurant, holding a tray and delivering the dishes. Yanxi waved to him and asked him to stop. At the same time, he took out a diary from his body, tore off a small half-page, wrote a few lines with a fountain pen, and handed it to the cook, saying, "Do you know the second lady in a suit at the table?" The cook said, "That's the second lady of the Wu family." Yanxi smiled and said, "Yes. When you serve the dishes, try to show her this note." The cook said, "Seventh master, that's not a joke, make a." Yanxi casually touched his pocket, took out a roll of banknotes, took out a 1 yuan bill, and stuffed it into the cook's hand. With a gentle smile, he scolded, "Go away. Can't you think of a solution?" The cook squatted down with the tray in his hand, greeted her, and left with a smile. Yanxi was still looking at the screen, and saw that after the cook served the dishes, he did not go to Miss Wu. He hated in his heart, "This stupid thing is really useless." After a while, the cook came out, and Yanxi walked to the corridor and asked, "Have you completed your mission?" The cook smiled and said, "Seventh master, don't worry, I can do it for you anyway." Yanxi said, "How? You tell me." The cook looked back, but there was no one, and then he spoke to Yanxi gently. She asked with a smile, "Seventh master." So this time, everyone had left the banquet and was talking casually. Miss Wu led Qingqiu to visit Yanxi. Yanxi had changed into long clothes, put on a small waistcoat, and had her hair cut sleek. He heard the sound of high-heeled leather shoes outside the window and knew that Miss Wu had come. But there were also two people laughing and talking, and it seemed that they were not the same person. He thought to himself, could it be that both sisters have come? Immediately, someone outside the door called out, "Seventh Master." Yanxi hurriedly said, "Oh, Miss Wu, please come in." The door curtain moved, and Miss Wu came in, followed by a girl of 18 or 19, who had already bowed from a distance with a smile. Yanxi recognized her as Qia Zizhen, and they had met many times, but they had never talked. So he smiled and said, "This is Miss Qia. I have never asked for advice before. It's rare for you to come. Please sit down." Miss Wu smiled and said, "Do you know each other?" Yanxi said, "I didn't know her at first. But when the second master of the Bai mansion got married last time, the bride was Miss Qia's best man. I heard people say that was Miss Qia, so I got to know her." Miss Wu smiled and said, "That's it. The two finally know each other. No need to introduce." Yanxi asked them to sit on a sofa chair, and he sat opposite them. But his eyes couldn't help but glance at Miss Wu. He thought, "Why did you bring a stranger?" Miss Wu also understood what he meant, and she couldn't help but smile as she raised her eyelids. Yanxi had to deal with Qia Zizhen first because she was a stranger, so he said, "Miss Qia, have you been to the Bai mansion recently?" Zizhen said, "I go there often. The bride is my old classmate, and we have a good relationship." Yanxi said, "Yes, the new couple just came back from their honeymoon in the south, and I heard that they are going to Japan again." As he said, he smiled, and then said, "This kind of custom is gradually being imitated in China." Qia Zizhen had nothing to say and just smiled. Miss Wu was a tactful person and felt that it was difficult for Qia Zizhen to continue what Yanxi said, so she said, "Guess what we are doing here?" Yanxi thought, "You know it, and I know it. What else is there to guess?" She replied, "I am a stupid person. How can I guess what you smart people are thinking?" Miss Wu said, "I heard that Mr. Qi has a lot of magazines, so we want to borrow them to read." Yanxi said, "Yes, yes, yes." She touched the frame of a dressing mirror behind her, and a door appeared. Behind the door was a study. The room was surrounded by bookcases and bookshelves. Yanxi stood up and pointed inside, saying, "Please come in and take a look." To the east, there are 3 bookshelves, all of which are magazines. "Please take whatever you want." Miss Wu and Qia Zizhen walked in and saw that except for a desk, a chair, and a couch, the room was full of books. Looking at those books, most of them were Chinese and foreign novels, followed by Chinese and foreign magazines, and there were also a few legends and poetry books. Probably this room was specially set up by Yanxi for entertainment, not like other people's study rooms, but a place for hard work. Qia Zizhen flipped through the foreign magazines. There were many titles, not only movie magazines, but also architecture magazines and radio magazines. Qia Zizhen said, "Seventh Master is very hardworking and also studies science." Yanxi smiled and said, "No, I also subscribe to one, because there are many beautiful pictures in those magazines. Fortunately, foreign magazines are backed by advertising and are priced very cheaply, not worth much." Zizhen picked for a while in the pile of magazines and took 6 or 7 movie magazines in her hand. She said, "Lend it to me for a few days and ask someone to return it after a few days." Yanxi smiled and said, "What do you mean by return it?" Qia Zizhen said, "Although I am not a scholar, I know the temper of scholars. If you lend him something else that he cherishes, he won't care if you don't return it. But if you borrow a book and don't return it, he will be very unhappy." Master Qi, is that right? Yanxi smiled and said, "I used to be like this. Later, I had too many books, and I lost one here and there. I was too lazy to sort them out, so 9 out of 10 books were damaged. I simply stopped asking, and let them go if they were lost." Miss Wu smiled and said, "That's the truth, Master Qi." Qia Zizhen said, "Then I will always return it, because if I borrow and return, it won't be difficult to borrow again." Miss Wu smiled and said, "You are a person that you can't mess with. As soon as you get it for the first time, you've already made an appointment to borrow it for the second time." Yanxi said, "It doesn't matter. There are plenty. Just come and ask for it." Qia Zizhen walked away while she was talking. Miss Wu followed Zizhen and walked out. Yanxi looked at her again and again, meaning that she should sit for a while. Miss Wu smiled and pretended not to know. Yanxi had to say, Why don't you just sit for a while? Zizhen said. It's getting late today. I'm in a hurry to go back. Let's talk again tomorrow. Yanxi said. Is Miss Wu also so busy? Miss Wu turned around and smiled at Yanxi, and said, if I say I'm busy, it's nothing big. If I say I'm not busy, I don't have time to sit and chat. Yanxi said, isn't it because I want you to chat? I have something to discuss with you. Miss Wu stopped and turned around and asked, what is it? Yanxi was asked by her, but he couldn't tell the reason. He smiled, lowered his head, and thought for a while, and said, let's not talk about it for now. Let's talk about it tomorrow. He looked at Kia Zizhen's back and walked away slowly. Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.